children with you. If you need a space for your children to go somewhere, if they're not able to stay put, you can use the multi-purpose room for the sisters that are there with their children. They can go in there. You can still hear the program, inshallah, but that way it won't detract from the others that are trying to focus and that are trying to benefit, inshallah ta'ala. So today, inshallah, we're going to be, Sheikh Hashim is going to be sharing his introduction to us. That's essentially his, my purpose over here right now is to introduce the speaker. But inshallah today he will be explaining how he came to be where he is right now. As just some initial points. Sheikh Hashim, as we obviously know, Sheikh Abdurrahman Ahmad, who had served, Maulana Abdurrahman, who had served as the Imam in Trenton Masjid for a very long time. He was a beloved figure of the community. And before moving to Boston, he had, even after having moved there, he's someone that we benefit from to this day. So Sheikh Hashim is his father. Sheikh Hashim is someone that is a father of many ulama. I've had the fortune of having met many of his sons, both in California, in New York, and here as well. So, as someone that went from being a musician to being a father of ulama, an alim, a scholar himself, and being a father of ulama, how do we connect those dots? Where do we go from? We have A, we have Z. What are the dots in the middle? How do we draw the lines in the middle? So inshallah, that's the purpose of his talk today, where he will be sharing that with us. So I ask everyone to pay close attention to what he is talking about. Give him your undue attention with your heart, with your presence of mind, that you are not just physically here, but you are mentally here as well. Inshallah, we'll benefit from his words, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So inshallah, without further ado, I'll ask Sheikh Hashim to begin.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu salam ala sayyidil mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa sahabatihi ajma'in amma ba'd. So as the introduction was made, so basically this is a story of my journey towards, as the title of the sitting was been made by the group, the committee of the masjid, from the darkness to the light. So I would have to say that the trip continues. It's a program in progress. What do they call what's the word I want? A project under construction. So at any rate, I was born in Cleveland, not far from here actually, Cleveland, Ohio. And it's interesting that now we have this Palestine issue and ostensibly the Jews fighting the Muslims, but it's not really Jews fighting Muslims. It's a satanic force, better known as the Sahyuniya or the Zionism, which has really nothing to do with Judaism or anything with the teaching of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. But anyway, in any case, my ancestors are from that ancestry. Actually, our ancestors came here in the beginning of the 19th or the 20th century. Jewish immigrants from Hungary, here in New York. Actually, they came to Brooklyn, and so I was born in Cleveland. We are basically from a Jewish Ashkenazi family and business people, and the American story coming from the village from somewhere in Europe and then self-made. So my grandfather sort of chalked out an existence for himself, became an early industrialist. And so that was our family business, basically, and I was born into that situation. Now my father, who was from a Jewish family, however, but he was a very staunch atheist. So we were raised with the belief that what you see is to be believed, and what you don't see, there's no reality to it. And moreover, that religion was the single most destructive force on the planet. In other words, religion is what's destroying everything. It's bringing division among people, and it's just an easy way. Everybody else works, and the religious people, they're just sort of live off the fat of society. In any case, so that was basically, that was basically how I was raised. And I remember early on, one of the first things that I remember in my life was sitting on the sofa, and we had a sofa that was overlooking the street. And I was sitting with my mother, and I said, people, and we had a synagogue right in the back of our house, actually, which I never saw the inside of that place. So I asked my mother, I said, people on Saturdays and Sundays, they go to the synagogue, they go to the church, and so why don't we do that? She said, well, if we did that, we could do the things we like to do on Sunday, or Saturday. So in other words, that was the religion. That's how I was raised, Enjoy yourself, seek your career and do what you want to do. And that's basically the American dream. My father and my mother both, they were, besides what they were, their actual official careers, they're very enamored in horses and music. So my whole family were musicians on the side. And so just like our young Muslim children were very fortunate to be raised with Alif, Ba, Ta, Tha, Jim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So we were raised from, 4 and 5 years old on music and notes and these things. So that was our family sort of hobby, and that was music and horses. My father was very fond of horses, and so I was also, from a very young age, we used to have to perform in the horse shows, what's known as horse shows. We would go on the weekends, and my elder sister and myself, we would play in the family group, and we would also, ride horses and go into the competitions. And then ultimately we moved to Durango, Colorado, because my father was a kind of a visionary of sorts, and rather than working in the business line, which was the family line, he loved horses. He loved the outside and the wide open spaces, as it were. And so ultimately we left Cleveland, and we bought 500 acres in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, and we had a guest resort, what is known as a dude ranch. Have you ever heard of a dude ranch? We've all heard of dude, right? But most people don't know what dude really means. Actually, dude is, hey dude, It's actually dude, back in the day when I was a child, it was a term that was used by the country people for the people of the city. We call them city slickers or dudes, because they don't know the Western rough, tough cowboy life, right? So we used to look down on them. So people used to actually come out to these places and live the Wild West cowboy life, horses and shooting and hunting and all this kind of thing. So in that era, which was, I believe I was around 10 years old when we moved out there. And so from my childhood, I was a very sort of introverted type. I probably still am. And so my favorite pastime was to go out into the mountains and climb the mountains and be out in nature and just marvel over the creation. I mean, that was what I used to love to do. And there was one mountain behind our house that was, and behind our property it was national forest. So you could go for days and days and never see a human being. It was awesome, So you would be out in the wilderness, in total virgin, creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and very beautiful mountains and trees and forests and animals and rock formations, etc. So that was my favorite pastime, to be out there in nature and pondering on all of that mandar, all of that, that view. It became very apparent to me that all of this amazing creation, it requires a creator. The Bedouins, they say, al-ba'ra tadulu ala al-ba'ir, wal-athar yadulu ala al-masir, wa khalq al-samawati wal-ard yadulu ala al-alim al-khabir. If you see a dung from the camel, it means there was a camel there. If you see a footprint in the sand, it means there was a traveler. And if you see a magnanimous creation, there must be a fantastic, unlimitedly powerful and wise and just creator, because that's very apparent, in the signs of the universe. So in any case, this was something that I started doing very early on in my childhood. And around the mid-1960s, my parents had various issues and problems. And then ultimately that culminated in their divorce. So we went with my mother to Los Angeles. And my grandparents had been in Los Angeles for quite some time. So now a young musician in Los Angeles, this is every musician's dream, Hollywood, And so now I was about 15 years old, and now I never was really conscientious about school. Not that I didn't like reading, I didn't like information, but I didn't think the school was teaching me anything relevant, so I never paid attention to my studies, but I was very enamored with music and expression, artistic things. So at a very early age, having the background of my own, from our own family group that we used to travel around and perform. So now, at a very young age, I'm there in Los Angeles, and so now I pursue my career, and I start working up the ladder. Now, at the same time, I'm observing, California, Los Angeles, and where we lived was in West Los Angeles, which is just in close proximity to Beverly Hills, Bel Air, and all of the very, the poshest areas of the United States. And the children of those areas also I used to attend that high school, University High near UCLA. And amazingly, I befriended, my friends that I would have from that strata. So visiting their homes and seeing, how their families are and their psychological, condition, it was shocking. That nobody's happy, nobody's content. Not only that, nobody actually, deals like a family. Children are totally disconnected from the parents. Parents are totally disconnected from the children. Parents are in juxtaposition with each other. It's a mess. You have these palaces, that people dream about owning. They have every luxury. And yet, the type of sadness and anxiety and stress and tension, psychological disorder, appalling. And so this is back in the 1960s. So all of these children, they're from these affluent families and these affluent communities. They would all be visiting psychiatrists, and they used to brag about, my psychiatrist, he's so-and-so, how much he charges, and so they're bragging about how bent out of shape they are, So it's, and then entering into the arena of show business, which may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save all of you from the exposure to that. And it's just such a bizarre, way of life, bizarre perspective of human existence. And so on the one hand, as a young artist, a young musician, usually artists, musicians, they're interested in expressing their feelings and interpreting their perception of things in their art form, whatever that may be. And then you have the business side of it. And so in any case, seeing these discrepancies at the same time, that was a very turbulent era and a very formative area in United States history, perhaps world history, in fact. The 1960s is a very iconic time. And this is a time when basically our generation started to challenge the status quo. In other words, God bless America, and we're the greatest thing that ever happened, and we're the benchmark of justice and integrity, and at the same time we're roaming around the world, bullying the entire world. If you don't fall into line, then see what happens. So we had during that time the Vietnam War. It's just the same situation that we saw in Afghanistan, the same thing that we're seeing in Palestine, the same syndrome. We have, the bullies of the world and the bullied. And so our generation started questioning these things just as we have today. It's very interesting today that we see a repeat in that. There's a time when people, the common people, start to wake up and realize that what they've been fed, what they've been brainwashed to believe is really not the fact. And, the facts speak much louder than the propaganda. And so you have large amounts of people, standing up and voicing, they're venting, they're appalled. So this is basically, in the 1960s we had this. We had the Vietnam War, we had also the Civil Rights Movement. And so being involved in all of those things as well, and also California also was the epicenter of all of these type of activities. At the same time, probably the single most manifest deficiency of society at that time, and remains, is the lack of any form of spirituality. Right? So it's all about physical existence. We hear this maxim, live life to the max. What do you mean by that? Enjoy yourself to the max. The parody is that the more one follows one's desires and seeks the next high, the next pleasure, the more one becomes more and more unsatisfied. A very iconic song of those days, there was a group known as the Rolling Stones, a rock and roll group. I think some of them are still alive. And one of their biggest hit songs, was this song called Satisfaction. But it wasn't about satisfaction. It was about, I just can't get no satisfaction. That was the whole song. The whole song was just this mantra, like verse again and again. I just can't get no satisfaction. I just can't get, I try and I try and I try, but I can't get any satisfaction. Well, what do you mean? You've got everything that money can buy. You have the palaces all over the world. You're flying around in your private jets. You got everything that, physically one would aspire for, but you just can't get any satisfaction. Very interesting. But nobody got the message. The amazing thing is, everyone said, oh, wow, what did he say? Great. The poor guy, he's suffering. Understand this, So, most people didn't really catch what was actually being stated here, but some of us were, very fortunate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, hey, look, there's something fundamentally wrong here. The whole concept of where we think success is, fame, name, physical, things, it's all a disaster. It's a very interesting study that was recently done. Probably was at Stanford. A happiness study. Where is happiness? What's it in? And they came to this, after doing extensive research, it was very interesting to find that the more materialistic is the aspirations of an individual, the lower his happiness levels go. I mean, they just found this across the board. So the more your aspirations are connected to the material existence, money, things, the lower your satisfaction, the lower your happiness level is going to be. Whereas the higher your aspirations of things above and beyond money, right? Some higher ideals. To that extent, your happiness level also is, proportionate. And so they're just talking about high ideals like, for example, being charitable, working for society or working for a charitable organization or something like that. So what about someone who's connected with the creator of the universe and trying to acquire his pleasure in serving his creation? Happiest people on the planet. And of course, the happiest people in the hereafter. But that's, of course, eludes most of the populations of the world. So back in the 1960s, this spiritual vacuum also began to be felt, began to be identified. And so, okay, spirituality, spirit. We have spirit, right? The human being is alive as long as he has what? Spirit, ruh. When he no longer has a ruh, he's a dead body. We know nothing of the spirit. We know everything about the body, feeding it, clothing it, housing it, etc., transporting it. But we know nothing about feeding the essence of this human body. So then some of us realize, okay, we need spirituality, spirit. We need to feed the spirit. So where do we find that? Of course, in those days, Islam was not like it is now. We're in the news all the time, every time. Everybody in the world knows mufti, had, hijab, hudud, jihad. Of course, we never heard those things before. So back in those days, you were not hearing about Islam. I mean, you would never hear anything about Islam. The only thing you would hear about Islam was, we had, of course, back at that time, we had the Nation of Islam. Nation of Islam by the movement spearheaded by Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Poole, actually, his name was originally, and then he took on the name Elijah Muhammad. It was in the name of Islam, but of course, most of you would know that it really had nothing to do whatsoever with the actual aqidah of Islam. But some of the concepts were borrowed, and then there was a very fantastic ideology that was built upon that, basically counteracting white supremacy and white racism for an opposite racism. And Malcolm X, rahmatullahi alayhi, came from that movement, as probably you would know. I'm assuming that most of you would have heard the name of Malcolm X. Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, rahmatullahi alayhi. Who has read his autobiography? Shame on you. Everyone must read. If you're living in this country particularly, and any Muslim for that matter, I mean, this is an individual that all of us who are talking about Islam my age, we were all influenced by him. I mean, he was perhaps, the most important catalyst for bringing people into real Islam. Through his, and we're talking about today, the sacrifice of the Palestinians, the people, our brothers and sisters in Gaza, giving their lives, for a cause. So this is exactly what he did. He gave his life, full knowing that he's going to be murdered. He stood up and spoke the truth, and as a result of his martyrdom, so many people accepted Islam. But point is back in that time, before actually he announced, he went to the Middle East, he went for Hajj, and he came to see what really Islam was, and then came back and espoused this. There was really no mention of Islam. So we didn't know anything about Islam per se, but we heard about yogis, we heard about Hinduism, we heard about Buddhism, and so whoever would come, there was an influx of Hindu gurus and yogis, and so I would be there at LAX greeting all these individuals when they would come. And so a number of us would, greet these people and go, become, follow their teachings, and they would have us meditating and doing yoga and fasting and various things. And it was kind of nice for a while, but then it seemed hollow. They don't have a system that's going to solve the problems of humanity. I mean, you can start feeling a little kind of a spiritual high, but it's not solving the fundamental problems. And so a number of us in that era, involved in these kind of things. Some of us left and traveled to other countries. A lot of people went to India. People went to Tibet. They went to the monasteries of the Buddhist monasteries in Tibet and Nepal and other places, looking for the answer to this spiritual question. Where do we get spiritual nourishment? And since that was an elusive thing in those days, we didn't know where to go. So after a while, sort of trying out all of these various isms and schisms, etc. So I came to this conclusion that there had been holy people who had been sent by God into the world. And they're all talking pretty much about the same thing. They were talking about a creator of the universe, and real success is connecting with him and living a life that is, congruent to what he wants us to do. But what is that exactly? That's not really clear, because the Bible, the Old Testament has its version, the New Testament has its version, the Bhagavad Gita has its version, the Book of the Dead has its version, and So I came to this conclusion that there's a creator of the universe, despite our indoctrination by my father, and that creator has sent prophets from time to time, and he has sent a message, and it was a continuum. But all the messages, or all the versions that I came across, had all been twisted and have been distorted. That was quite visible. But it also appeared to me that there must be an original one somewhere. It's not thinkable that such a magnanimous creator with all control of the entire universe is going to leave his creation without guidance. So it must be somewhere, but where might that be? So whatever I had come to find there in my search in America, I was not satisfied with that. So through my research, I came to this conclusion that perhaps what I'm looking for is going to be found in the monasteries of the Coptics in Ethiopia. How did I come to that conclusion? Long story, but the khulasat is that they claim that we have the original teachings of Jesus. And as I said, we didn't know anything about Islam. We didn't know anything about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the last prophet that we heard, even though Jews don't recognize him generally, but Jesus seemed to be the last prophet that we knew about, or that I had heard about, that was a prophet of God. And I knew very well that he wasn't teaching that you go to the church on Sunday and sing some songs and he's going to take all responsibility to just do what you like. No, that's not the system that Jesus came with. So where's the original one? So the Ethiopian, the Coptic monks in the mountains of Ethiopia claim, and keep in mind that Ethiopia, it has a very rich, religious historical background, not only in Christianity. Keep in mind, the first hijrah was to where? It was to Ethiopia. It was not to Medina. 2 hijrahs to Ethiopia. And of course, the Najashi, the Negus, was a scholar and a very pious man in the Christian tradition, who ultimately accepted Islam. So I didn't know all of that, but I was aware that they had a very ancient and a very rigid sort of protection of their tradition in the mountains of the monasteries, which seemed to had not been adulterated. So I thought, okay, I'll go there. So people said, so when I told this to people, I'm going to Ethiopia. I mean, Ethiopia? For what? Who do you know there? Do you know their language? Do you have any contact? I said, no. So they said, well, then how in the world what are you going to do there? I said, well, I kind of surprised at myself, that, let's just put that in my mind. I said, if Allah knows what I'm looking for, so He's going to take me there. I had this full certainty. So I set out, left my career, and everybody said, you're crazy now, you're about to make it, and you're I said, no, I'm not making it at all. I'm breaking it, and you're all breaking it as well. And this is what we need to do. So I decided to leave and go to Ethiopia. So I left Los Angeles, I started hitchhiking. In those days we had hitchhiking. You know hitchhiking? They don't do that anymore. It's kind of dangerous now, I guess. I don't know. So you just go out on the road and you stick out your thumb and people come and they pick you up. And we used to meet very interesting people like that, and it's free. So that's the other great benefit. So I left Los Angeles, I get as far as San Bernardino, and I meet another guy. What you do is you stand on the entrance to the freeway, the on-ramp, and you hitchhike. If you get a ride, so be it. If you don't, well, try tomorrow. So we're in San Bernardino, there's another guy also hitchhiking on the same on-ramp. So Maghrib comes, sunset, nobody's coming, so what do we do? So this guy says, well, there's San Bernardino, they have a freight train, sort of depot here. So what we can do is we can jump on a freight train and then that'll take us right to New York. I said, okay, fine, sounds great. So we jump into a freight train, into a coal car, and it's taking us off to New York. And however, on the way, we were walking up and down the train, and the police saw us, and so we were apprehended in Kansas. So we got put into jail in Kansas. So I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to fast and do yoga, and so I'm in the cell doing yoga and standing on my head and, fasting on. So the police thought, this guy's weird, get him out of here. So they let me go. I get to New York, and from New York, there used to be sort of like what they used to know as the Hippie Express. You would have this plane that would go to Luxembourg from JFK. For $130, you could, it was just like basically a cargo plane with seats. And it had no in-flight service or anything. I don't think there was even any attendance. In any case, so I fly to Luxembourg. From Luxembourg, long story, a lot of things happen, short version. Main points, we'll just focus on that. So from Luxembourg, I went to Paris. I stayed in Paris for a while. Then I made my way down through Spain, and kind of like the Tablighi people with the pack on the back, but the Tablighi people don't have a guitar with them also. But that's so I would move along, you know, playing my music and just sort of, you know, making my way slowly down through Spain, and then ultimately I reached to Morocco. So that was my route. I wanted to go through Europe and then to Morocco and go across North Africa and travel across North Africa and then down through Sudan and into Ethiopia. Reason being was, number one, that Morocco was a very important hippie destination. You know, it was a very mysterious and very, you know, wonderful oriental kind of a place. And also, because I also knew that there were Muslims, they used to go Muslims. We didn't know Muslim, M-O-S-L-E-M. And so I was very interested to see these Muslims because, you know, being a big fan of Malcolm, even before I was a Muslim, you know, I was a big fan of his, because in music also I was with the Afro-American community, so I was always with them and got involved in their struggle as well, because it was part of that era. It still remains. So I was very interested to see these Muslims because, you know, Malcolm says, this is the one time in my life that I've seen black, white, and everything in between getting along together as one brotherhood. Wow, you know, which is really not a big deal. I mean, we're all human beings, right? Somebody has a little bit more pigment in their skin, some dark, I mean, what's the big deal? I could never figure that out. How do people have a problem with that? But anyway, it is a big problem, remains a problem. It's never been solved. So he's saying that, you know, these Muslims, they're not even cognizant of any such kind of differences. And, you know, whatever he wrote about them. So I was very interested to see these Muslims on the way, although my objective was to go to the monasteries of Ethiopia, but I wanted to check these Muslims out. I was very interested to see them. So that's how I took my route. So when I get to Morocco, it's now Ramadan. It's the very beginning of Ramadan, and I reach to Morocco, and everybody's fasting. I said, everybody's fasting in this country? He said, yeah, even the king. I said, are you kidding me? You know, and so since, you know, in you know, Eastern disciplines of fasting, in fact, we used to, you know, go for days upon days without eating anything, just drinking water, you know, trying to flush out the system of all toxins, and that was the concept. So I knew about fasting. I used to do that, but not like this here. This is a new dynamic. The whole country is fasting. Everybody, even the ruler of the country. I said, wow. So I said, yeah, that's great. So I just went ahead and fasted with everybody else. And I just had intention to just kind of, you know, go across, and I ended up staying in Morocco for about 6 months. And traveled the length and the breadth of the country, went everywhere, and then ultimately, you know, musicians always hook up with other musicians, you know, the al-jins yamilu ila al-jins, as they say, you know. So in the south, anybody from Morocco? Do we have any Moroccans here? Where are you from? Huh? Tarbida. So you know Gulamim in the south. So I'm traveling all the way down. I stayed in Essaouira for a long time. I was in Casablanca, and I went all over the Fez, Meknes, Tanja, and then ultimately I went south to Agadir during the winter. So I went down south to Agadir, and then from Agadir down to Gulamim, and then Sidi Ifni. In Gulamim, which is near the Spanish Sahara, it's in the desert toward the end of the southern part of Morocco. So there I meet up with Moroccan musicians, Ganawa. You must know the Ganawas, you know. And so they, you know, they take me along with them. And so I learn their music, and we perform. What we used to do is we'd go to the market. You go to the souk. It's kind of like halaqat al-ilm, but it's not, not the kind of ilm that one should be seeking. But anyway, you go in the market and you just put your instruments down in the market, in the souk. People make a halaqah, you know, and then you perform, they throw in some coins, and you gather that, and you take off and you go to the next place. So it was wonderful because I was, you know, immersed in the culture and, you know, being with these people. But musicians are musicians wherever, you know, and so there wasn't really any practice of religion and all the, the nonsense that musicians do everywhere. That's what they were doing as well. But nevertheless, they were Muslims. So one of the things that was highlighted at that time was the adhan. The adhan. And you're all saying adhan? Yeah, adhan. Because you grew up hearing adhan. But a person who's never heard the adhan, that's something really awesome. Particularly there in Morocco, in those small places where it wasn't on microphone, it was natural with their loud voices, and they were just beautiful. So whenever they would call the adhan, I would just listen to that. I don't know what they're saying, I have no clue, but it was just magnanimous. It was just fascinating, beautiful. And so my Moroccan musician buddies, they would be watching me, he's listening to the adhan. They thought. So one of them came to me, and his name was Mahmoud. He says, look, you're our brother, but we want you to be our real brother, and so become a Muslim. And pledge allegiance to King Hassan. That was during the time of Hassan Athani. I said, well, I'm not ready to pledge allegiance to any, king of yours, but as a matter of fact, that's why I left America. I'm looking for religion, but I don't know, what your Islam is, that's what I'm looking for or not. But it was very touching, And the point I'm making here is that despite the fact they didn't pray, they didn't fast, they were doing all the stuff that musicians do wherever they are, but Islam still remained an ember in their hearts. They see somebody is interested in Islam, they would love to see me become a Muslim. Another very interesting thing in that door, as we say. So one sector of our clientele would be the military. Yeah, so you'd have like a military base, and you'd have these, the military, they want to have a party, so they call the musicians, and they have a party, and they're drinking, and they're getting drunk, and all that kind of thing, and we're playing music, and then they get rowdy, and then somebody says something to somebody, they start to fight. The brawl begins, and then someone says, Sallu ala Rasulillah. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik. And they all, they start giving salat on Nabi alayhi salatu. They're drunk, and they're fighting and then party, but mention the name of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they all just melt. And then they start to cry, Samihuni ya akhi, and they start hugging each other, kissing each other, and Ghaltan ya akhi. And then start up the music, and then rinse and repeat, and then until the next brawl, and then again. So it's very interesting, So Muslims, subhanAllah, regardless of how far off they can, but still that little bit of iman, it's a very precious thing. Anyway, so I'm observing all of these things, I'm observing, and yeah, absolutely, as Malcolm said, this concept of color, it doesn't exist there, In fact, in Essaouira, I lived in a house with a family for several months, and it was a beautiful family, and they just, I was just like their son and their, one of the family members. And the husband, the father, he was black as coal. I mean, really. And the mother was from the north. She was from, and she was white as snow. And the children were all the color of the rainbow. Yeah, they were all colors, every shade. Fantastic, And there was no issue. People don't have an issue like that. Here in America, it's amazing, these Western countries, how they can, shaitan has played with their psyche, The color of a skin can be a defining factor of the value of a human being. Amazing. And then another thing, the concept of the classes, we don't see that in Morocco. It's not so prevalent as we see here in the West, the haves and the have-nots, and the divider, the kind of invisible divide between the haves and the have-nots. You don't see that. And the generosity, you don't see people, homeless people on the streets in Morocco. It's a poor country, basically. But you don't find people hungry. You don't find people, out in the street without any relation, without anything, not like you see here. In California, you have 170,000 homeless. 170, that's the size of a good-sized city. In Los Angeles alone, you have 50,000 homeless individuals. And the paradox is that just beside them you have trillions of dollars of real estate, the highest concentration of billionaires in the world, one of which could solve the problem, at least financially and infrastructurally. No. So it's not about, it's not about what you have in the hand or in the pocket, it's what you have in the heart. So a big heart, a generous heart. So this is what, I saw these things. And it's amazing, we don't see this in the West. So ultimately, about 6 months goes by in Morocco, and then ultimately, okay, I'm supposed to be going to Ethiopia. So then I kind of I didn't ever want to leave Morocco. I love the place. And so I go to Algeria, I go to Tunisia, and pass through these countries, and then into Libya. In Libya, this was 1970, 1971, and Muammar Gaddafi had just become the just taken over Libya at that time, so his picture was everywhere. So when I got to the place actually where he's from, Sirte, it's a place, right in the middle of Libya. So I was traveling on a bus, and we get down on the bus, people from Pakistan and India, you've probably seen it in the Middle East. Where buses are traveling, they have these little stands where, they sell food, and they have little, sort of eating places. So the bus got down there, I'm eating at this little place having lunch, and 2 police officers are standing behind me. They don't bother me until I finish my lunch. They're polite enough, and then they said, our superior wants to see you. Okay. So I go with them, and this is, I suppose, something like the chief of the police of that town, and then I say, Assalamu alaikum. By this time, I was wearing Moroccan clothes, and I spoke a little colloquial Arabic, and Assalamu alaikum, and he said, Alaikum assalam. Where are you from? I said, I'm from the United States. He said, why are you wearing these clothes? I said, I'm a free man, I wear whatever I want. No, you're not. You can't wear these clothes in Libya. You have to wear the clothes of your country. I mean, really? Yeah. And if you don't, we're going to put you in jail. Really? I said, I don't even have any other clothes. He said, you better find some, because otherwise, and I'm sending these 2 guys to follow you, and you change those clothes, and you're an American. You have to look like an American. I mean, it's bizarre. Anyway. So now what do? I don't have any other clothes, and I don't feel like going to jail. So and these guys are behind me. So when I get back to the restaurant, or that little eating place, so another bus had come, so I jump on the bus real quick, and the bus takes off, and these guys, and I get away. Okay, now on the bus, so one fellow gets down from the bus, and he buys this big sack of almonds. And he gets back on the bus, and he passes them to everybody, everybody in the bus gets almonds. So this I've stumbled on a group. They're traveling together, and and so I got almonds too, even though I wasn't with a group, but still I was on the bus. So everybody gets out. Another guy gets off, and he buys a big sack of boiled eggs, and he gives to everybody. Then by sunset, so we get down and we have couscous. Everybody has couscous, right? Everybody knows couscous? In North Africa, every country has its own version. Morocco has its own, Tunisia has its own, so Libya has their own couscous. So now everybody eats couscous, dinner. And now they're fighting over who's going to pay for everybody. In America, they're going to fight, you pay. No, you pay. Why? You pay. And no, I'm paying. No, I'm paying. They're fighting over who's going to pay? Come on. This is really strange, So, subhanAllah, and so these are the things, people ask me, how did you accept Islam? What ayat, what hadith, who gave you, nobody. Dawat was seeing these characteristics. I'm seeing these things, Think about this, Sahaba, when they traveled around the world, they would travel from point to point. Whole nations would accept Islam. They didn't speak a word of their language. They didn't have PP presentations. They didn't have, these great orators. They didn't even know the language. So how did all these people accept Islam? Because they saw that. Their invitation was, be like us. Kunu mithlana, be like us. Yeah, definitely. So can we go out and say to the world, be like us? Well, I certainly can't, but... So this is our problem. When we become like that we can say to the world, be like us, then we'll see some huge change in the trend. In any case, so we're on this bus, and what it appears that this is some group, and they're traveling to Benghazi. This bus was going to Benghazi. We get to Benghazi, everybody goes in a separate direction. Nobody knew one another. Mind-boggling. So they were all acting like they were all relatives or members of a group or a club or something. And nobody had any real actual connection with the other than Islamic brotherhood. So that really struck me. Okay, now I get to Benghazi, and I need to go to Egypt. And at that time there was a skirmish going on between Libya and Egypt, which is happening all the time, these kind of things. So I wasn't allowed to continue by land, so I had to take a flight. I had to go on the plane to go to Cairo. And the plane was going that day. So to leave the country, you have to get an exit visa, an exit stamp. So I go to the office, the concerned office, and it's closed. It's like 9 or 10 in the morning, and it's closed. There's nobody there. And if I don't get this exit visa, I'm not going anywhere. And it's going to be another week, I'm going to have to wait for another flight. So I'm really, stressed on that. In the meantime, kind of like a janitor, a fellow that kind of works he sees me and he comes around and says, well, what's the problem? I said, I have to get an exit visa. And because there's a flight tonight, I have to go and get that flight and go to... He said, sorry, because this is Mawlid of Rasulullah. It was 12th Rabi al-Awwal. He said, this is the Prophet's birthday. Nobody does anything today, Sorry. I said, then how, what am I going to do? I'm stuck here. So this fellow, he sees I'm really, stricken with anxiety over this situation. So he said, okay, just hang on, wait a minute. So he comes back after a while with some keys. He opens up the place, opens up the thing, takes out a stamp. He's like that. I said, how in the... and alhamdulillah, I went off to Cairo. So this fellow doesn't know me. I mean, can you imagine in America, it's Sunday, for example, and you have to get on a flight, and you go down and you find the janitor of the immigration department or whatever. Are they going to open that? Are they going to even pay any attention to you? So, a human feeling that this is a person that, needs to have help, so if I can help him, I'm going to help him. It just really blew me away. I said, wow. So then I get to Egypt, and in all these places there's so many things that happen, but it's hopefully it's in the form of a book. Brother Maheen and others are always pushing me to do this. I'm not really inclined towards that, but people are pushing, so from time to time it moves, the project moves forward, then, as we say, waqafa himar al-shaykh. But anyway, we're trying to compile all of that information. Inshallah, perhaps one day it'll be a book. So, and anyway, just some highlights we can mention today. So in Egypt, interesting things happen, but so I leave Cairo and I go down the Nile, traveling down the Nile, or I should say up the Nile actually. The Nile is flowing that way. So moving up the Nile towards Sudan. On the way, I meet another Afro-American brother who's a bass player. He's also a musician, so we hit it off. And he was traveling to Ethiopia thinking that his ancestors were from Ethiopia. So he's looking for his ancestors, so we were traveling together. So we get to a place called Aswan. Anybody from Egypt? Yes. Yeah? You know Aswan? Where are you from? Alexandria. Bahri. Yeah. So that's the other extremity. So I'm down at the end in Aswan. And at the end of Aswan there's this lake, there's Buhaira Nasir. It's a big lake, and in those days, you would get on this boat. It was something like, have you read Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, the old boat with a paddle wheel on the back, It was something like that, and you had people and cargo and animals and everything on that boat. And it was like a 2-3 day journey. So you'd go from Aswan and ultimately you'd end up in Wadi Halfa in Sudan, beginning of Sudan. So on this boat was a group of these Sudani Bedu, the Bedouins of Sudan, who would take their camels up to Egypt and sell those camels, and then they would be coming back on the boat. And they would call the adhan and make salat in Jamaat. Now, for most of you here, if not probably all of you, anybody here has accepted Islam sometime, or you're all born in a Muslim house? All born in a Muslim house, right? So you've seen people make salat since day one, right? Mommy, daddy, brothers, sisters, nanny, daddy, and everybody else, right? Suppose you never saw anybody performing this salat in your life. Try and imagine what that might look like. Well, I'll tell you what it looks like. It's the most awesome thing I ever saw. Now, I have been in North Africa, but I've never been, so I was like sitting right here, me and my friend, and these fellows were right in front of us. So they called the adhan, and obviously, as I said earlier, this adhan, I said, wow, yeah, that's that amazing thing, whatever they're saying. And then they stand up and they start offering their salat. Now, I've never seen this. I mean, I've never been in a masjid, because in North Africa, and they follow the Maliki madhab. In Maliki madhab, they don't allow non-Muslims into the masjid at all. And he has very strong evidence for that. Others have more of a accommodating view. But in any case, North Africa, I think things have changed now, but at that time, if you weren't a Muslim, you don't go in a masjid, period. But I always wanted to go in the masjid and see what they do there, but I never had the opportunity. So now I'm getting a front row seat right on the boat. So now these fellows stand up, and then, as we know, the imam stands forward, and then we have this line of these. Now keep in mind, these are Bedouins from the desert, and someone like me coming from the West, villagers, Bedouins, you wouldn't imagine them to be extremely disciplined people, extremely spiritual people. But what I'm seeing here, they line up like one line, perfect. And then the Imam said, Allahu Akbar. And all of these fellows, like one body, Allahu Akbar. Eyes all just, pinned to the place of sajda, and they're motionless, perfect line. And then Allahu Akbar in ruku', and I'm just watching this. Wow. Look at this. And you can't appreciate this unless you've never seen it, right? And if you've seen, I don't know if any of you have seen what they do in churches or in synagogues, they don't have anything like this. They have the kind of prayer, kind of a ritual, but the collectivity and the focus and the intensity, it's nothing like our salat. Totally, there's nothing like it. So I'm just looking at this and I'm just, wow. And then when they actually all go into sajda, I said, that's it. That's it. Whatever I've left my house searching for, that's it. That's it. That is the epitome of connection to the Creator. Whatever that religion is in that's it. And I know what religion is, Islam. So I know from that moment that I'm supposed to be a Muslim. But after all, I've gone all this way and I'm, supposed to go into these monasteries. So I wanted to actually just get up and start, announce my Islam and just join these fellows. But, I still had this, this desire to, I made all this preparations to go to Ethiopia and join these monks and all that. But that was the moment when that was it. Now I'll tell you this story. Fast forward, since we're talking about sajda. Fast forward, this is like 1973, after I became Muslim, I'm back. And we happened to be with a Jamaat in State Street Masjid in Brooklyn. Who's seen State Street Masjid in Brooklyn? Who hasn't seen State Street Masjid in Brooklyn? see it. This is one of the very first masjids in America. And there's a lot of history in that masjid. I could go on for the next few hours talking about that masjid. And the first lessons of Quran took place in that. There was a Sheikh Dawood, he was originally from Jamaica. You can Google this guy and see the role he played in early Islam in America. It's amazing, this guy. He and his wife, Sister Khadija, they used to live there. So anyway, four of us, who knows Wali Muhammad Marhum? We're from Philadelphia. So Wali Muhammad was with us, and there was another brother, Khalid, and three of us, revert Muslims. We were there, staying there with the Jamaat in State Street Masjid. So in the middle of the night, we get this knock on the door. Now, Brooklyn, it's cleaned up a lot, but at that time, it was a pretty rough area, even that part of Brooklyn. So somebody's knocking on the masjid door, 12 o'clock in the night, it might be anything. So it's like, ready guys, what's this? So we cautiously come to the door. Who's that? He said, let me in, I want to be a Muslim. Okay. So this Puerto Rican, young fellow, Puerto Rican man, he comes in and he starts telling us his story. He says, well, life was good, I had a wife and children, I had 2 jobs and I was doing fine. And then I got introduced to heroin, I started taking heroin, I got addicted. 8 years addiction habit. And if you know anything about that, then you would know that's a disaster, a nearly incurable disaster. And so he loses his wife, his children, his jobs, and everything's gone, and now he goes into these various rehabilitation programs, nothing works. So then, in the moments of total despair, like it's over, he sees a picture somewhere, like in a magazine or wherever. He sees a picture of a Muslim performing sajda. Okay? And it just strikes him. He says, if God listens to anybody, he's going to listen to that guy. Person has his face on the ground, rubbing his face in the ground, humiliated like that. God is going to listen to that guy. So what he does, this fellow, he's not a Muslim, by the way. He doesn't know anything about Islam. He doesn't even know about salat. He just sees this sajda. So what does he do? He spends the whole night in sajda. How many of us have spent the whole night in sajda? This guy's not even a Muslim, but he says, God is going to listen to me. And he spends the whole night in sajda, crying, oh God, help me, solve my problem. And he says he remained like that until the sun came up. He said, when the sun came up and then I picked my head up, he said, I felt that I don't need heroin anymore. Cured. I mean, subhanAllah. So now he says, if this sajda is so powerful, then what about the whole religion? So now he's left his home at that moment, he's roaming all over New York City, and in those days, it's not like just Google the nearest masjid, We don't know how there's the sahulat that we have now, In those days, there was like in the whole of New York, there was 3 or 4 places where you could offer salat. You couldn't really say there were masjids, but there was something like a masalla or an Islamic center. There used to be an Islamic center in Manhattan on the waterfront, and then you had that State Street Masjid, which was a proper masjid. They had 2, 3 other places. So this fellow's roaming all over New York trying to find Muslims. So in the middle of the night, he finally catches up with us. So we told him, we said, well, look, we're new Muslims like you, and, we're in this Jamaat, and we're trying to learn Islam and, bring others into it and all that. So why don't you join us? So what he did, he took his 2 hands and put it in his pocket. I'll never forget this. He pulled everything out of he said, look, this is everything I have in the world. Take it and just take me with you guys. So we don't know the value of what we have. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us, let us realize, the wealth that we have. In any case, so back to the ship. So now I'm seeing these people making salat. This is just totally awesome. Okay, now ultimately, then I get to Sudan, and a lot of interesting things happen in Sudan, but fast forward. So ultimately I do reach Ethiopia. Now interestingly, I meet these monks and I go to their places and I meet with them, but I was not impressed by them at all. Even though, in fact, they look like Muslims. They have long beards and they wear turbans and they have clothes similar like this. Zuhud, they have nothing to do with the world. They're always in worship, but they don't have any light. There was no nur on their faces. I said, this is not right. If these people are really connected to God, they're going to be, they're going to be enlightened, not going to be endarkened, Now, on the other hand, you would see a Muslim, and Muslims, by the way, in Ethiopia, half the population basically are Muslim. We have anybody from Ethiopia? Nobody from Ethiopia? In Ethiopia, half of the population are Muslims, and as we said, the first, the place of hijrat was in Ethiopia. So the first actual Muslim community was in Ethiopia. Great ulama and great Sufiya and great, mashallah. So, and it's also the time of Haile Selassie. I don't know if you know much about him, but he was quite a tyrant. And he didn't like Muslims particularly. So Muslims had a lot of problems. But Muslims were very, very pious, and people were, So you would see a Muslim, he would be head of a little shop, right? And he'd have his tasbih in his hand, in his time he would be free, he would be reading Quran, and he'd be full of light. And these monks, full of darkness. I said, this is not right, And any case, so then I got kind of disenchanted about these Coptic monks, and then I started traveling around Ethiopia in various places. And so then ultimately I meet up in a little village somewhere, I even forget where it was. Ethiopia is a big place, I don't remember where it was. So in some little village, I'm walking down the street in the village, and some fellow comes out and says, our guy wants to meet you. And so I go in the shop, I think it was a barber shop or something like that. So there's this fellow, he says, I'm a sportman. I put on these shows, I do these kind of sporty activities like, you can run over me with a car, and it's, and you can put stones on my chest and bash it with a... He was a pretty strange individual. Anyway, so he says, I put on shows doing these kind of things, so you're a musician, so why don't we join? Why don't we collaborate and we can travel around the villages and do that? I said, yeah, that sounds great. Like I was doing in Morocco, So now we're doing these shows. Now the thing is, he's not a Muslim, he's a Christian. And the Christians and the Muslims of Ethiopia, they don't get along too terribly well. And definitely they don't eat each other's food. Okay. So anyway, so we're traveling around from village to village, and somehow I would always, wherever we go, I would meet Muslims. I'm just naturally attracted to them, which my buddy didn't like that too much. And, but nevertheless, we had a good relationship. So we come to some village, and I'm walking, it's like around noontime, and I'm walking down the main street of the village is a dirt road, it's a very small village, you got some settlements on both sides, well, that was it. So behind me comes this fellow running, and he grabs me, he says, we heard that there's some American Muslim in our village, is that you? So I can't imagine any other American in this village, so I guess I said, yeah, I guess that's me. So he said, you're Muslim? So he grabbed my hand, he looked at it, he goes, oh yeah, you're a Muslim. I said, yeah? So how do you know that? He said, look at your hand. Now if you look, you'll see a 1 and you'll see an 8. In other words, that's very clear. He said, yeah, that's 18, okay? Here you have very clear, 8 and 1. 81, 18, 99 names of Allah, very clear in your hands, you have to be a Muslim. Okay. That's all I needed, I was already on the verge anyway, I just needed something outlandish. Being a musician, being a, a hippie and all that, we need something weird. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how to, deal with everybody. Anyway, I said, okay, fine. That's all I needed. So now he takes me to he's got some soothsayer, some Najumi kind of a guy. He says, this is going to happen. Anyway, so then he takes me to his house. This guy, his name was Adam. He was actually a school teacher. And so he knew some English, and he took me to his house. And we stayed up all night long, and he taught me the alphabet. Alif, Ba, Ta, Tha, Jim. We didn't pray, but he taught me the alphabet. Again, we didn't pray Salat or anything. And also, at this point in time, I was a vegetarian for many years, from my influence from the Hindus and the yogis and all of that. So I had been a vegetarian for quite a long time. So then my friend Adam, he says, well, we Muslims, we eat meat because our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he ate meat, and so you need to eat. I said, okay, fine. And I got very sick as a dog, actually. I said, it's okay. If I have to eat meat, I'll eat it. It's okay. So now, my buddy, so then in the morning, then I go meet my buddy, and I said, look, this is it. هذا فراق بيني وبينك. This is the end. Now I'm a Muslim, real. And I'm going to go back to Addis Ababa, and I'm going to start learning Arabic, and I'm going to start learning about how to pray and all that. And my poor friend, he really broke down, started crying. No, we're having a great time, and we're doing great. Come on, don't go. And I said, I have to go. So I went back to Addis Ababa. So in Addis Ababa, so I go to the place that's called the Mercado. We don't have anybody from Ethiopia. Anyway, in the middle of the city, there's a marketplace, Mercado, probably Italian. So there's a big mosque down there. So I said, okay, I'm going to go down there and I'll find Muslims and have them teach me how to. At this point, still, he said, who gave you Shahada? Nobody. Who told you to say Shahada? Who did this? Nobody. Nobody was even, So I just wanted to be a Muslim. So I became a Muslim on my own. So now I want to go and pray. So now I go down near the masjid, and there was labor and people that laborers and things like that. These little small rooms that they would rent for about 50 cents a day. It's big enough for just to sleep in there. So I started asking these other fellows that were living down there. I said, okay, I'm a Muslim now. I want to learn to pray. Can you teach me how to pray? So one fellow would say, well, I don't know exactly, but let's go to my friend. He probably knows. So I went to his friend. I don't know. So all these guys, they don't know how to pray. SubhanAllah. But they're all very happy that I became a Muslim, and that, yeah, you should pray, even though they're not praying, but you should pray. So what do I do? I said, well, just go to the masjid and see what they do and just follow them. That's all. So, okay, sounds good. So I went to the masjid. Now keep in mind, Ethiopia is not like a tourist place. Maybe it is now, but it certainly wasn't in those days, And Ethiopians are very, it's one of the few places in Africa that never suffered colonialism. 7 years the Italians were there, and they got booted out within a very short time. And so they're very, very vigilant about any foreigners, trying to make moves on their country. So anyway, and I don't really look like an Ethiopian very much, so I kind of stick out, So anyway, so I go to the masjid, and I'm going to just, see how they do it and pray like they pray and what have you. It so happened that it was Salat al-Jum'ah, subhanAllah. So the first Salat that I have is there in this Jami masjid, and it's Salat al-Jum'ah, and I don't know what I'm doing. So I go in, and the khutbah is going on, and it's time for Salat, so I just stand up and see what they're doing, and okay, ruku, and I remember something, a little bit of that, so ruku and then sajda, and that was fine because I could just follow the people. Okay, after I finished, that was fine, that went fine. And then I leave the masjid, and then I see people are offering nawafil sunan on the steps and out in the corridor. So I guess I should do that too. But I didn't really know at this point, I didn't have the tartib down properly, So people notice that this guy doesn't know what he's doing, So all of a sudden probably I was like in sajda, and all these people started to gather around, and they started like, oh, yeah, I'm caught, like this is my first salat and maybe my last, And then, subhanAllah, then some person comes and just says something, and they all disperse. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save me, I don't know. So anyway, so then I go to a place called Harar. Harar is the center, one of the center, very old Muslim area, and probably the most concentrated place of the ulama and Sufiya and Islamic scholarship you'll find there in Harar. And subhanAllah, it was fantastic. I mean, I could just go on and on about that. It was just simple house. Living in these houses, they were just made of mud. But they were so clean and pure and beautiful and simple life. And you know, in Ethiopia, they would, in Ramadan, so my first Ramadan was there in Harar. And they would spend the whole night, they would remain in the masjid all night, and they would, you know, like the Yemenis, they would have these halaqat of Quran, they would read Quran, tilawat, all night long. So after, you know, shuruq, then you would think they'll go and sleep. No. They would go in their shops, go to their field. Amazing, unbelievable. Anyway, it was a beautiful time I had there in Harar, except for one thing, and that was that, as I mentioned, you know, the intelligence agencies couldn't figure me out. What's this American guy doing here? You know. So they would come and take me to their center and interrogate me. What are you doing here? I said, I came here looking for, they said, come on, tell us, what are you doing here? You know, they couldn't believe that. So every day they would take me and interrogate me, the same questions. So ultimately, you know, my friends advised that you should go to Yemen, because here in Ethiopia, because of the fact that we are under duress, you know, because the king doesn't really like us, and we have a problem here, and you'll always have a problem here, so go to Yemen. So I took their advice and I went to Yemen. That was also a very interesting journey, and we have a lot of incidents that took place on the way. And then ultimately I get to Yemen. We have anyone from Yemen? It's always interesting to, on the journey to, nobody from Yemen? So I get to Taz, and when I get to Taz, I meet, there was one Sheikh Umar Saif, great alim there, and his son Ahmad. I don't suppose they're still alive, but in any case, I stayed there for a few months, and then they said Hajj was coming. So they said, so you should come with us for Hajj. I said, Hajj? I'm just a new guy. I mean, how? That's like, no, you come with us. I said, okay. So they said, you have to go to Sana'a, and in Sana'a you have to, you know, get a visa to go for Hajj. And, you know, and then you can go. So I went to Sana'a, and I met great ulama there in Sana'a, and mashallah, it was the first place where I really met ulama that really started teaching me substantial things. And then ultimately I went to get the visa, and of course my passport has my, you know, original name and my original picture as a hippie musician. It didn't look like a person that would be going for pilgrimage, you know. So I had to get a testimony, I had to get a shahada, I had to get something from the Majlis al-Qada al-A'la from Sana, from their ulama, that this guy's actually a Muslim, and so I can go for Hajj. This was 1971. So I go with my friend, you know, to one of the ulama, and he took me there to the Majlis. And so, subhanAllah, this Majlis Qada al-A'la in Sana, and all of these old ulama with their Yemeni jubbas and imamas, and mashallah, about 10, 12 of them. So they started asking me questions, you know, how did you accept Islam, and, you know, my story and this and that, and they're listening. Then they asked me, do you know something of the Quran? Can we read something of the Quran? I said, a little bit. They said, do you know Surah Fatiha? I said, yeah, I know Fatiha. They said, read. So I read Surah Fatiha, and they all just start to weep. And then they wrote this shot. I still have that document, you know, handwritten, and they stamped that. And so then I can now go for Hajj. So in those days you would go on the boat. So from Hudaydah I get on the boat, and it's about 3 or 4 day journey to Jeddah. And Jeddah in those days was a little village, and it was just like, wasn't much at all. And I was developing these big abscesses all over my body, you know, during this journey. I didn't understand why. What was happening was that I had an attack of amoebas on my liver. And so these amoebas were eating away, you know, on my liver, and I had this big abscess. And it was from time to time, you know, manifesting in these big boils on my skin. And then they would settle down, but there on that boat, it just really flared up, and I was just really delirious. And by the time I get to Jeddah, they have to carry me actually off the boat. And luckily, I had the address of a doctor who I was supposed to see when I get to Jeddah. So he gives me the, and by the way, I'm performing, I'm going for Hajj. I still have my guitar and all those things with me, you know. And but I didn't take that with me to Mecca, luckily. So, alhamdulillah, for Yom al-Tarwiyah was, I think, the next day. And so by the grace of Allah, I was able to perform Hajj. And after Hajj, my intention was to stay in Medina. I wanted to stay in Medina at that time, Jamiatul Islami of Medina, a little small place in the middle of the desert, nowhere. And at that time, Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz was the principal of the institution. So to show you the difference between Saudi Arabia then and now. So when I get to Medina, so I met Sheikh Abdul Aziz, and he says, I said, I want to come and I want to study. He said, yeah, ahlan wa sahlan, welcome, no issue, but the only thing is that you have to change this visa, because you have a Hajj visa, you need a student visa. He said, that's not a problem, just after Hajj, when the king is sitting, during the time of King Faisal. So still they had the Bedouin, system. He said, when the king is sitting in his majlis, just go and tell him you need this and he'll sign that for you, and get it done. That's how simple it was, It's not like that anymore, right? So I was intending to stay there in Saudi Arabia and just remain in Medina, but then I came down with hepatitis and I came down with pneumonia and I had this abscessed liver. And then in the hospital, ultimately I was hospitalized. I fell off the bed and that liver collapsed, that abscess broke. It shot the fluid of the abscess into my lung cavity, and the lung was collapsed also. So I was pretty much a mess. In fact, the doctors, after I started recovering about 3 months later, they said, we had no expectation that you're going to live through that, But anyway, here I am. So about 3 months in the hospital there in Jeddah, and in those days, it was such, it was so primitive that they couldn't perform any surgery like that. So I had to come back, I had to go somewhere for that surgery, so I have to go anywhere, then I'll come back to the United States. So I came back to Los Angeles. I have no money, I have no anything, but I was such an interesting case that the UCLA teaching hospital took me on as a teaching patient. In other words, a guinea pig, you can experiment with it. So another 3 months in the hospital there in UCLA. It was about a 6-month ordeal. Then finally I managed to, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to regain my health. And there in Los Angeles, we don't have madrasas, we don't, now, subhanAllah, we have masajid, we have madaris, we have katatib, we have hifth of Quran, we have halal meat shop. There was no halal meat shop. Wali Muhammad Marhum, that was the second meat shop, halal meat shop in the country. Did you know that? I think it's still there. It's still Kuwaita meat shop, yeah, in Philly. There was one fellow, Ismail Gaby, he was in Brooklyn. It was the first halal meat shop. There was no halal meat shop before that. We used to eat Fatiha sandwiches. Has anybody eaten a Fatiha sandwich? What's a Fatiha sandwich? Yeah, so we don't, we didn't have any money anyway, so we could hardly buy anything anyway. And then in those days, it's hard to find bread that wasn't made with lard. They used to use lard in everything, and all the bakery things. So to find halal bread was a chore. And, we didn't have any money or anything, so what we would do, we'd read Surah Fatiha and blow it on the bread, a Fatiha sandwich. And that's, And so if you wanted halal meat, you'd go and buy a goat or a chicken or whatever. And you didn't have masajid, there was madaris. If you wanted to learn something, ultimately then, myself and others who wanted to learn things, you had to leave the country. If you wanted your children to get an Islamic education, forget it. You have to leave the country. There was no other alternative. So, this is not by 1972. So, I enter into Los Angeles City College, the inner city. There was an inner city college, and there was an Arabic course. And interestingly, the teacher of that course was an Italian guy. He was also a movie producer and all. He was a very colorful fellow. And he was a specialist of 9 languages. And but he was he was the most thorough and erudite Arabic grammarian that I've ever met. I mean, nahu, sarf, balagha, unbelievable, this guy. And he used to say, you know, that this language, and he was a master of 9 languages. He taught 9 different languages. He said this language is totally heads and shoulders above all of the languages. And half of his class would be about i'jaz of Quran, even though he wasn't a Muslim. But he was so convinced this is the kalam of Allah. I mean, obviously a person with that level of understanding. And he used to claim also that the Arabic language is also from God. He says, you mean to tell me that these Arabs, Bedouins who can't read and write in their tents in Arabia, they came up with this language? Impossible. That came from God also, you know. We don't even make that claim, but it's very plausible anyway. In any case, so I spend the next year in City College and doing odd jobs, cleaning houses, whatever, just to kind of survive, and then with the intention to go back to Medina. And then finally, in 1973, I make that move. As I said, you want to learn something, you have to leave the country. So I leave New York, I leave Los Angeles, and I get to New York. And there was a friend of mine that I'd met in Medina, also Afro-American brother, and he had since then gone back to New York, so I was looking for him. And again, State Street Masjid. So I was looking, and I didn't know that place, but then perhaps I would find my friend there. So there in State Street Masjid, I met for the first time this Tablighi Jamaat. So this Jamaat had come from Bangladesh, and these guys, you know, I remember the... And the Jamaats in those days were quite different than the Jamaats these days. I mean, these individuals, they knew 2 things. They knew Salat and crying in dua. These are the 2 things that they had. And with those 2 things, you would see miracles take place. So anyway, I was looking for my friend, and then I met this Jamaat, you know, and then I said, where have you guys been all my life, you know? So anyway, so I joined them, and we now traveled around, you know, these regions, you know, the New York, Philadelphia, I think we went as far as Boston, Chicago, and these places. So for 4 months, and in those days, you know, you don't have masjids, you stay in people's houses, you stay in parks or wherever. In fact, one time we spent a night in a speakeasy. Have you ever heard of a speakeasy? This is from the Prohibition era, when you had these cellars under the ground where they used to sell alcohol. And so one new Muslim, he said, my brother's got a club. That's what he had. So we spent the night. That's how, you know, Islam started out, you know, in this country, like that. In any case, so I joined these people, and then I sort of, you know, delayed my trip to Saudi Arabia, and then ultimately in 1978, after marriage and some children, then ultimately then back to Makkah, and from Makkah to Karachi, and there I spent about the past 4 decades, and now here I'm back in the States. So I'm basically back in Los Angeles. I was in Los Angeles, now I'm going to be in San Francisco. So that's kind of the story, in a very short, condensed form, and perhaps, as I said, we're trying to make a book out of it. Perhaps it might benefit someone, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu feekum. Q&A? I don't think there's any questions. I mean, what are you going to... But if so, yeah.
So where did you take the shahada?
Well, I answered that question. Did you remember what I said? Actually, I never, the Shahada was, actually having said that, I can say this much. Formally Shahada, nobody ever asked me to do that. So I suppose the first actual Shahada was in Salat, you know. But having said that, recalling when I was in Egypt, and now I have to go, I want to go to Sudan, right? So Sudan is also not like a tourist place, right? You know, so they were reluctant to give visas, you know, to everybody and anybody. But you know, I had already been, you know, because when I left America, I don't want to see this country again. I don't want to see America again. I don't want to see America, I don't want to see their culture, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So I had, the dress of Morocco, a Moroccan dress and all that, and I was speaking a little bit of Arabic. So when I came to the embassy, the Sudanese embassy, so I said, Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam. He said, are you Muslim? I said, yeah. I pretty much was, kind of. And so they said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Yeah, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. I mean, I said, I know that. They said, okay. They stamped it. So I guess actually that was kind of the first Shahada. But actually, so that's what I'm saying is that no one was actually really there to, guide me through the process or give me Shahada in the formal way that we see now. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just out of His kindness just guided me through the whole thing. And yeah, so that's how that happened. Yeah.
When you brought back to the U.S., did you have a chance to interact with
Oh yeah, definitely. So how did they react? Okay, so as you know, in America, generally speaking, now if my parents had been, religious, then I might have had an issue. But since they weren't religious, it's just like, and since I had been performing professionally since I was around 13 years old, and so I was kind of like off on my own at a very early age. And, after becoming a Muslim and leaving a lot of the habits of, the hippie culture and the musician's way of life, so they said, well, anyway, he's better than what he was, So I didn't have a problem in that sense. However, one of the big sort of disappointments was that in my musical, career, so I was kind of a, sort of a pivotal figure, and I would be, I would lead bands, and I was kind of an influential person in that regard. And I had my circle of, musicians that I was with, and I used to kind of be like the ringleader. So I thought, okay, they used to, listen to me in Jahiliyyah, so they should listen to me in Islam, right? Well, they didn't, yeah, so I was totally rejected by my, former community and former colleagues, and so I found myself kind of on my own now. And then leaving music also. I didn't really, in the beginning, I didn't realize, what the deal was with music, and that was my whole life. Since I was 4 years old, that was my whole object of life. So actually, after accepting Islam, I didn't have any concept that this is not, a good thing to be engaged in. But amazingly, to my sort of horror, a professional musician, it's like sports. You have to every day you have to put in a lot of hours of practice, and it's discipline. And I just started losing interest, which really kind of upset me at first. I mean, this is my profession, this is what I do, this is me, and I'm not even interested anymore. And then after a while, then I figured it out, then because you're not supposed to be interested in that. So it wasn't until around 2-3 years later that actually I gave up. I gave up music. And interestingly, in 1978, you probably have all heard of Yusuf Islam, Cat Stevens, who also was a famous musician. So, but we weren't colleagues because actually I left music before he came to fame. But we met in England. I didn't even know who he was. I mean, I never heard of him because I was out of the scene altogether. And so we spent a good amount of time together, and then he came and stayed with me in New York when I was, before I left for Saudi Arabia. And interesting story about it. So he asked me, he said, so Hashim, tell me, is this music haram or what? And mind you, the early Muslims, when we became Muslims, there was basically two main constituencies accepting Islam. One were the criminals of the street, like Malcolm type, and people that were, like in jails and criminals on the street. And then musicians. A lot of jazz musicians actually became, they accepted Islam as long back as the 40s. I don't know if any of you knew Luqman, the former Amir of Tabligh. They might know Luqman, yeah, the old Tablighi guys, they know Luqman, Abdul Raqib, Abdullah Masrood. Bilal is Bilal still alive in New York? You don't know Bilal? Used to be a trumpet player. These are all super talented guys, I mean, top of the line jazz musicians. And they left all of that, and we used to all just sell stuff on the street. Because, we didn't have any other profession. So when we left that, what are we going to do now? So we used to all just walk out on the streets in New York and sell trinkets, like costume jewelry. I used to have incense, agarbatti. And we used to just walk around on the street and sell things. And people, I don't know how many people accepted Islam in those days. Because we'd meet people, that's what we do all day long. People, hey, what are you guys into? We're into Islam, and Islam is this and this and this. People every day, we were accepting Islam like that. So wonderful times, really amazing time in the very beginning of kind of the spread of Islam here in the United States. So a lot of us were actually musicians, and in fact, the Emir of Tabligh, Luqman, there's a very famous, you could say, the father of modern jazz, a guy by the name of Charlie Parker. They used to play together. Abdul Raqib was a musician. And most of us, actually most of the Tablighi guys were musicians. And, but some, they didn't have anything else to do, and so they found it difficult to leave it. So when Yusuf asked me, he said, okay, what do you say? Is this haram, halal, what, So I said, look, Yusuf, just carry on. Just keep doing what you're doing. You'll figure it out. Inshallah, Allah will show you. And shortly after that, he actually, probably you know that, then he left music altogether. At that time he was still playing. And then he left altogether. Now he's actually returned just a few years back. But at that time he left music altogether. So then I went to Saudi Arabia, I lost contact with him. So somewhere around 20 years ago or so, I happened to be in London. And so I looked him up and he said, yeah, come down, I've got a hotel. He had some hotel in London. 4-star hotel for Muslims. It had no alcohol, it had a masjid, and people said you're crazy, it's not going to work, but it worked beautifully. Anyway, so I met him over there. And so then we were reminiscing old times, and then so then he told me the story of how he actually left music at that time. So he said he was here in America and he went to he was in some masjid, inner city masjid, there are Afro-American brothers. So he was introduced to one of the brothers over there, and the brother said, this is Yusuf Islam, former Cat Stevens. So our Muslim brother, American brother said, Muslim, you're a musician? That's haram, man, you can't do that. So he said, that just hit me. Oh, and he said, from that day I just left it, yeah. Since then he's actually returned back. I haven't seen him in a long time though. He's a fantastic person. So yeah, I kind of rambled on to other things, but okay. I see you have a big maida spread over there, and you must be very hungry with this long discourse, yeah. So that's kind of the story, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us all on the path and continue to open these doors of His mercy and keep us on it until we leave and leave from here to His mercy. Ameen. Ameen. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Hashim, for taking out the time. And I heard this story a few times already, but every time there's something new that gets added. So we look forward to the book, inshallah, when that happens. But inshallah, if I can ask all the brothers to, we good to go? Ajay? Okay, yeah. So all the brothers and sisters, the food is set up, so you can please make your way to the back. And once again, as you're going, just cooperate with the volunteers.